right, continuing on with the TMCC Library Open Genealogy Lab Outstanding Guest Speaker Series, today we are pleased to present Martha Grenzeback. Martha began researching her own genealogy at the age of 12 in her native California and quickly became an addict, although genealogy was an off and on hobby for many years as she earned her living as a translator from Hebrew, Spanish, and French. After moving to Omaha in 2000, she obtained a master's degree in library and information science at the University of Missouri and attained her dream job as the genealogy and local history librarian for Omaha Public Library, helping other people research their family histories and managing Omaha Public Library's extensive genealogical collection. Today's presentation is titled Researching the History of a House. Houses have histories just like people, and their histories are intertwined with the stories of the people who live there. Have you ever wondered who lived in your house before you and what happened to them? Do you know how your house fits into the history of your neighborhood? Learn how to start answering these questions about your house or your ancestors' home using a rich variety of local history resources. So without further ado, I'd like to offer a warm virtual welcome to Martha.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. I am the genealogy and local history librarian at Omaha Public Library. As she said, it's a job that I love. And this presentation was originally planned for Nebraska residents. So it will be focusing on a lot of the resources that we have here in Omaha. But I have tried to look up a few things about Reno, and really most of the things I'm going to be talking about apply to wherever you are. I hope this will sort of spur you to look and see what is available in your own county. Most counties have some of the same types of resources. You will just have to look and see where they are in the place where you live. So let us get started. The first question that you always want to ask when you are getting interested in your house is, why are you doing this? And one of the most common things that people come here to the library for, to our special collections, is because they are researching a building. And they might be doing that for all kinds of reasons. Many of them are genealogists. You want to know where your ancestor lived. You want to know what was special about where they lived. Or you are living in an old house and you want to know who else lived there before you and something about their lives. And the reason you want to think about why are you doing this is because it will determine your focus to some extent. If you're most interested in the architecture or building style or that sort of thing, you're going to focus more on the architectural side of things. If you are interested in who actually lived in that house, then we're going to go more down the genealogy path. In either case, you're going to be looking at a lot of the same resources, but it is sort of good to keep in mind what your ultimate objective is. Some people just like old buildings. We get a lot of architecture students who are interested in the building styles. Genealogists are definitely interested in who lived or died in those houses. And often people are trying to get a building onto the historical register. We get actually quite a few people at the library here who think there's a ghost in their house. So they want to know who died there or what terrible traumatic thing happened there. So that may be your reason too. So where do you start? There's a few questions that you always want to ask about a building. First of all, when was it built? That will direct what sorts of records you're looking for. Who built it? Who lived in it? What has happened to it over the years? And does it have landmark status, or is it located in the same neighborhood as a local or national landmark? And it's good to know that, because if your house already has landmark status, that means somebody has already researched it. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel. Most of the work will have been done. For most of us, however, it's going to be a longer slog. You're going to have to do a little more research. If your house, however, is similar in style and age, or is it's in the same neighborhood as one of those buildings that is a landmark, then you actually will you'll learn a lot just from reading the case files for those buildings that you could apply to your own building. So here in Omaha, we've got this great website, the Landmarks Heritage Preservation Commission. They have pulled a lot of information together. I really recommend, if you have any interest in Nebraska at all, to go and look at this website. It's landmark.cityofomaha.org. Besides a lot of information about things here in Omaha, it also has some useful information about architectural styles, frequently asked questions, has some good links. And most states or cities will have something similar. At the very least, they will have the state and national registers of landmarks. And this is the one down here, which I think I put on the handout. This one down here is for Washoe County. Well, actually, for the whole state of Nevada. I'm going to keep mixing up Nevada and Nebraska because they're so close. Anyway, and for the Nebraska ones, these are all available online, and I believe the Nevada files are also online. The Nevada site does have links to the state and national landmark registers, and including the nomination forms, which is where people have put all the information, making their case for putting the building on the National Register. So you're going to learn a lot. This house, for example, it tells you what style it is. It tells you something about that style, that it was popular in America during the first 40 years of the 20th century. It tells you something about that neighborhood. It's not a usual style for that neighborhood. And it tells you who it belonged to. It was the residence of Harry Buford, who was a well-to-do member of the Black community. And there's a lot of history here. So whatever county you are researching, you do want to go and see if you can find the files for local landmarks, as well as the National Register. So usually you're going to start your research, assuming that your building is not already a landmark. You're going to start with this sort of bricks and mortar research, which involves looking at a number of different types of records: property records, tax records, building permits, newspapers, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to look at all of these, so I won't read them now. Let's start with the property records. Property records can include a lot of different kinds of records. People tend to think in terms of deeds, but it also includes release of mortgage, leases, warranty deeds, mechanics, liens, all sorts of things, anything to do with a property. You might actually have some of these at home, the ones for your own house, or you might not. You hopefully have your deed, but you might not even have that. If you don't have it, then you're going to have to go to the courthouse to get them. And it used to be you always had to go to the courthouse. Now more and more counties are putting their records online. Douglas County, Nebraska does have a website where you can search for these types of records online, and you can see them online with a watermark. If you need a printed copy, then you would have to order that from the courthouse. And I looked and saw that Washoe County also has a nice document service online. It looks like you can bring up the image. You can search all their indexes online. So check out your own county if you're not in Washoe County or Douglas County, Nebraska, because I'm pretty sure you will find something like that. One thing you're probably gonna need when you are looking for your property records is a legal description of the property. And by that, I mean, it's not the same as your street address. It's a description based on the name of the addition. It's based on the city plat, or if in a rural property, township section range. And it never changes. Unlike street addresses, which you may have noticed do sometimes, the numbering changes, the street name changes, the legal description of the property does not change. And that is normally something you're going to want to have, because it's going to make looking for property records a lot easier. The easiest way to find that description is generally from the tax assessor's website. And the one here is for Douglas County, and the one down here is Washoe County for Reno. And all of you who are from other places, I think you'll find if you go and check your county or even city websites that you have something very similar, where you can look up the information about the tax value of properties, and you'll see that there's quite a bit of other information there too. I just want to mention a few things about rural properties. Most states use a system called the Public Land Survey System, which basically divides the whole state up into squares that are 36 square mile blocks. So 36 square mile blocks, and then those are further subdivided. And those are pretty easy to figure out. There, you can get a plat that shows them all. And that is how you would look for your property if it's out in the country. If it's in town, it's going to be divided in plats, and each plat is going to have blocks and lots. There's a few states, mainly the original 13 colonies, Texas, West Virginia, and Kentucky, that still use a system called the meets and bounds system, which some of you may have come across when looking for old deeds in those states. They'll describe the property as started at a black oak tree, go this many chains and rods till you get to something else, and then to the rock at the corner of the property with so-and-so. So those are interesting to use. We're not going to get into it right now, but you will come across those if you're looking for primarily rural properties in those states. So here is where we can see the legal description. This is my own house. And you can see sometimes the legal description can sound a little complicated. It's got the name of the replat, which is the same as a plat, basically. The lot, the block, and then all these little bits about how many feet and how many this and that. I've got the address right here. And we're going to look at some of the other information that you can get off of this tax assessor's site. This is why I usually send people to the tax assessor site before anything else, especially if they know very little about their property, because you can get a really good chunk of all the most basic information you need to start your research. Here is the Washoe County tax assessor website, and you can see it's got a lot of the same stuff on it. And if you noticed, it even uses the same colors. I don't know if that's something that, like, tax assessors just like that shade of blue. But over here, you can see the legal description, marker tract 1 LT, which I'm not sure what that is, 1 block 7. And it tells you the subdivision. It also tells you the year it was built, which is another really important fact that you can get from the assessor site. And it's got a lot of other information that's going to turn out to be helpful. It will also tell you some handy things like what what it's made out of. This says brick veneer on frame, roof, what kind of roof it has. Those are all things that you kind of want to know. At least I do. And once you have that legal description, you can also search by the legal description to find something when, to begin with, all you have is the legal description. And the reason you might only have a legal description is if you're looking, I don't know that they do it this way so much nowadays, but back in the day, in this case, 1890, often when they listed the real estate transfers in the newspaper, it would be with the legal description, not a street address. And so you are able to put that address in here. I mean, sorry, that legal description in here. Here's the addition and the lot and the block, and look up the property that way and get the address of the property that way, which you'll need. And you often also, if you have an old deed, sometimes that too is only going to have the legal description in it. And what you want is the address to continue your research with. So we've plugged in the legal description here. I'm on the Douglas County, Nebraska tax assessor right now, but the Washoe County one works very similarly. So that search takes me to this. It takes me to a map where I can see exactly where those, in this case, there's 2 properties on that block and lot. This one and this one, right there where the little dots are. And it tells me the street address down here, 3318 Jackson Street. And if I click on these, it will open up the that information page that we saw a little earlier, that kind of information page that tells you a whole lot about the property, and it also gives the most recent transactions and a bunch of other useful stuff. Well, oops, sorry, like this. Once again, here, this is my house again, because I love my house. This is the year it was built. It tells you if it was remodeled and so on. You really want to take all of this information a little with a grain of salt. It's not totally reliable. The date is usually in the ballpark, but it might not be exact. The remodeling thing also is generally not reliable at all, but it does usually give you some pretty concrete information about, you know, it's 2 stories, frame siding, it's drywall inside, a flat roof, which is not very common in Nebraska because of all the snow we get. And so you can get a lot of information here. And this is Washoe County's version. I really liked it. First of all, they have some very cool real property maps. So I encourage you, if you are in Reno, to look at those. And here too, searching will take you to this map where you can see where the property is. This is like the tax assessor, the assessed property number up here. And just like we saw in the previous page, it tells you all this sort of handy information, the square footage, the utilities, land use, who owns it, and here is the year it was built, 1907, which seems to be pretty early for, I was kind of hunting around trying to find some older homes in Reno, and of course I didn't know what neighborhood really to look in. And then if you don't live in Washoe County or in Douglas County, Nebraska, just go to your county website or tax assessor's site, which could be at either the city or the county level, depending where you live, and look for something like this, because I promise you there is something like this. Okay, so you might already actually have an abstractive title. That is a very wonderful thing to have when you're researching the history of your house, because it basically is the timeline, the history of your house. Often an owner will pass it on to the next owner if they've ever had one done, or you can hire somebody to make one. It will provide you with all the historical and legal details about the property. What it is, if you haven't ever seen one, it's a written report taken from county government records that provides a history of all the transfers of a piece of land, all the claims that were ever made against it or about it. Could be deeds of trust, could be mortgages, liens, judgments, property taxes. I always suggest that you still go and look for the original documents, but this is a really nice shortcut to being able to find all those original documents and knowing that they exist. If you don't have this handy abstract, you would have to basically make your own by kind of searching for all these documents yourself. You might, however, as intimated before, be able to find them online with not actually having to go to the courthouse. And also, if you've used Family Search at all, you might have noticed that Family Search has digitized quite a lot of earlier deeds for different counties and states around the country. So that can also help you a lot. They unfortunately do not have anything for Nevada or Nebraska. Also, when you're figuring out your chain of ownership, keep in mind that if there's a big gap, it could be because sometimes ownership is passed by from one through probate. It's transferred by inheritance, so you might want to be looking for probate records if there's kind of a jump in ownership and you're not finding a deed to explain it. So how are you going to find those properties? You'll be happy to know that usually there's an index. There's two major types of property record indexes, at least for deeds. There's a lot of different kinds of property records and a number of different types of deeds, but the two main ones are direct and inverted indexes, or what you probably know as grantor and grantee indexes. Those are organized by the names of the parties. That seems to be what Washoe County has. And basically, to get the chain of title, you would start with the most recent owner, and as the grantee, look up that grantee to see who the grantor was, and then you're going to look up that grantor as a grantee and work your way back. Sometimes earlier deeds will have a sort of summary of the whole chain of title up to that point, which will make your life a lot easier, but they don't always have that. And especially the more into modern times we get, the less likely they are to have a whole description tracing the property back to 1900 or whenever. And then the other type of index is the one that we have here in Douglas County, Nebraska, and they have it in some other places too, and that is a numerical or tract index. Those are organized by the property. Another reason why you really want to know the legal description of it, where they'll have a page for a particular block and lot, and they will show all the transactions. They'll just list them for that piece of land on that one page. Now, this system is actually pretty ideal if you are interested in researching the property. If you are doing genealogy research, then the grantor grantee is better because that way you have names you can work with. Here you only have to know where the property is. This is how it looks. This is the replat where my house is. So you see here, it just lists all the different transactions for lot 1 in Tegemeyer's replat. And here are the ones for lot 2. And as I mentioned, you can actually access this online. So if any of you are doing research in Douglas County, Nebraska, you will be able to do most of your research from far away, as long as you don't need a printout. You could do a screenshot though, which is basically what I have here. Okay, why are we going to all this trouble? What is it that you want to get out of this? Well, once again, the legal description, because so many other records are tied to that. The property record is going to show you who owned or rented the building and when, and it will help you make a timeline for your house, which is what you want to do, just as you want to make a timeline for in your genealogy to know who was where and when. And then significant jumps in the property value might show that the house was renovated or rebuilt, or all kinds of things might have happened. You can often you'll usually get the idea of what the property is worth from mortgages or sale prices. If it sells at one price and then only 6 years later it's selling for way more. Although in our current environment, I don't know if that is indicative of anything except the crazy real estate bubble, but normally it's going to show that something has been done to the property. And the same way, if you're using the censuses, which as genealogists, I know you are, if you look at the values of properties that are given in several of the censuses, that can also give you an idea of how that family is doing, especially when you compare it with other the property values of the property of the neighbors, and also how they are doing over time. So some records may describe buildings. Deeds don't usually. They usually just talk about the property itself, although they may say and all the buildings on it, but they don't probably go into detail about what is actually on the building. Mechanics liens, which are those are sort of what's the word? It's a claim against a property holder because they failed to pay a workman for work that was done on the house. So those are kind of nice because they usually do describe the work that was done on the house. So you'll find out, oh, a new roof was put on the house in this and such year and was not paid for, which is why there's this lien on it. You can't count on there being one, and you also can't count on a mechanic or a work person actually putting a claim in on a legal claim in against something. So this is just like a cherry on the top of everything else if you find it. Tax records are one of my favorite records for genealogy in general, but they're also great when you're researching property. Here too, if there's a big increase in taxes relative to the neighbors, because if the whole neighborhood goes up in taxes, that just means the whole neighborhood has been reevaluated. But if just your house's taxes have gone up, that can indicate that something was done to the house that made it worth more. Tax records can be hard to find. I checked with our county here. They don't really have anything past 2000 because in 2000 everything went electronic and they didn't feel like they needed to keep old property tax records unless there was something wrong with them. So, but they don't have them as a whole group of records that you can search. And that's pretty common, unfortunately, for counties around the country. Tax records are not a type of record that has been necessarily retained. However, sometimes the State Historical Society or a state archive will have earlier tax records. Family Search has digitized a lot of early ones. Unfortunately, again, not for Nevada or for Nebraska, but it's always worth looking. In Nebraska, the State Historical Society doesn't have tax records for Douglas County, but it does have them for other counties on microfilm. So you always want to ask, you always want to check, you always want to look and see what there is. Building permits are basically the gold standard for researching your building. Building permits tell you a lot. Building permits are required when you start building a house, so that often gives you your date of construction, but they're also necessary when anything is done to the house. So that can really help you fill out your timeline of things that have happened to the house. In Omaha, unfortunately, somebody in the planning office about 15 years ago, before I got here, threw out all the older building permits because, I don't know, because they were an idiot. People were very upset, but they were gone. There is only one neighborhood that still has them, and they've put them online. So if you are researching the Dundee neighborhood in Omaha, let me know, because there's some great resources for that. And those weren't thrown out because they had been out on loan. The Dundee neighborhood was applying for historical neighborhood status at the time. But there's other places you can find the building permits, or not the permit itself, but a description of what's in it or what it was for. They're usually listed in the paper of record for your city. In Omaha, that's the daily record, which unfortunately is not digitized. Well, it's not indexed. And although it's now online, you can't look up earlier issues online. But other places might have their paper of record online. I believe for Reno, it's Reno Gazette Journal. So you might try looking for building permits in that. You can find them. If you're looking in newspaper databases, you can often find building permits mentioned. You're going to be searching usually for your address. Sometimes you're going to be searching for the name of the owner. There's a lot of different ways you can go about that, but newspapers are probably going to be your best bet if the permits themselves are no longer extant. I have good news for you there in Reno. Washoe County has a building permit search, which I was so excited to see because I wish they had that for every county in the country. The drop-down menu seems to imply that it goes back to 1922. If you notice down there, that's the first date there. But I couldn't find any, just sort of trying to search somewhat randomly. I didn't see anything earlier than 1980s, which might just be when they first went electronic. Often these types of databases, when they set them up, they start off with everything that's already born digital. And if we're lucky, they gradually try to scan and enter older documents. They don't always do that, and it's usually not a priority project. So I don't know. I would just keep checking back on Washoe County and see what they have. And you might just try calling them up if your building is in Washoe County and find out whether they have something earlier and how to access it. And wherever you are, you're going to want to find out who has the building permits, if they still exist, the old ones, I mean. They should be keeping the new ones, obviously, who has them and how you can access them. So we don't have building permits, but one thing we do have is a nice collection of water permits. We have those here at the library because the Metropolitan Utilities District didn't really want to keep them themselves. They didn't want to throw them away. That's how we get a lot of our stuff. So it's almost not quite as good as a building permit, but it is a good indication of when a building might have been built, because connecting the water is one of the first things you do once you build a house or other building. So we've got this nice collection of these, and we are in the process of indexing them so that anybody will be able to look up their address and see what there is. So this is one example of a type of collection that you might not think to look for, but I would really recommend that you check with your local library, your local historical society, and see what similar types of collections that might offer you some of the same information that you're looking for, say in a building permit or in some other document which you can't seem to find. So newspapers are one of your best tools for researching the history of your house. Here at the library, we have the great good fortune, and we also paid a lot for it, to have the Omaha World Herald as a digital database going back to 1878. And then we, from 1983, it's electronic content up to 2017, and after that we get the full digital image again. So by electronic content, I mean you just get the text, you don't get the pictures, you don't get charts, things like that. And anybody with an Omaha Public Library card can get home access to that. If you do not have an Omaha Public Library card, this database is also available through Genealogy Bank if you have a subscription to that. It's a nice newspaper database. And then another local paper that we have, Omaha Star, which is for North Omaha. And we've got that as a digital database as well, with home access with a library card. And then we have a lot of local newspapers on microfilm, and you will find that most libraries, most public libraries, or university libraries too, are likely to have their local newspapers on microfilm if they don't have them digitally. So you always want to go and see what your local library has. Even very small libraries will often have a valuable resource like this. The Omaha Daily Bee is digitized, and that is free with a bunch of other Nebraska newspapers at this address, nebnewspapers.unl.edu, and it is part of the Chronicling America digitized newspaper site, which I hope you're all using. That is a wonderful free site with newspapers from all around the country. It's sponsored by the Library of Congress, and they give grants to the different states to digitize local newspapers within certain parameters. So check that out if you've never done so before. And then a great place to find free newspapers online is the Ancestor Hunt. I don't think I put that on the handout. So just if you Google the Ancestor Hunt, it will be the first thing that comes up. So he's done a wonderful job of just categorizing all of the digitized newspaper collections around the country. He organizes them by state and then by county or city. They're all free, and they cover different time periods, different places, but you're bound to find something. So here is an example of something that you might find in the newspaper. I mean, if this is your house, which you would find just by searching, this is the Omaha World Herald, you'd be searching on the address in quotation marks, which is what makes the search engine look for it as an address. You're going to put in 4544 Walnut. Don't put in streets, because it might appear ST, it might appear STREET, it might appear with nothing. So only the minimum to get what you want. And so you bring this up, and lo and behold, it even has a picture, which is great. It also tells you who built it. And then if this is not your house, but you live in Morton, your house is in Morton Meadows, that's a neighborhood, and it's on Walnut Street, or it's just in that general area, you might want to investigate T.B. Campbell because he was a contractor. He probably built more than one house in that area. Even if you never find a direct sort of description of T.B. Campbell, he built my house, you might still find enough information to think that this could have been part of the same development, because usually they didn't build a single house and then go away. And you will also get a lot of hints about what style your house is, what types of materials were used, and so on. And then a lot of newspapers would have these types of columns, which are great. Just what was going on, what was being built in Omaha. I mean, Omaha is a place where a lot is always being built because they tear things down at a crazy rate. But it's always been a growing and expanding place, and I suspect Reno might be as well. So you'll often find some useful things here about houses being built and who's building them. This is something we have, and I suggest that you should go and check your own local library and see what they have, because this is the kind of thing that is often not on a library's website. We have put it on our website, but it's not the easiest thing to find. And it's certainly probably not going to be in the catalog. So most libraries have clipping files of some kind, where they stick all sorts of stuff that's useful to researchers but hard to classify. So you'll find information about neighborhoods, you'll find biographical information about prominent people or unprominent people. Our file here, this side here, is the history file. There's cards for people and for places and just anything that ever appeared in the paper or elsewhere about somebody. We used to have librarians who did mostly that. We no longer do that exactly, but I still add things that when I've done a bit of research on something or somebody, don't want to redo it later, so I will put it in our carded file. And you can call us up and we will look up things for you too if you're not local. So when you go to your library, make sure you ask whether they've got any vertical files or if they've got information about buildings in the neighborhood. So people usually want to know what who the architect of their house was. Often there isn't exactly an architect. If your house is part of a larger development, you may only find, say, the name of a contractor or maybe an architect who designed the whole neighborhood. But the place to find that would be, once again, the newspaper, as we saw. There's some trade publications such as the American Contractor that you can find at Google Books, and probably the Internet Archive, which is another good place to find digitized books. And often they used to run sort of sections for each state with little news clips about who's building what where. So I've found some good information about architects for different properties there. Architectural firms might have files on old projects or on the people who used to work there and what they designed. That's sort of easier if you actually know what firm might have been used. The Nebraska State Historical Society, which now calls themselves History Nebraska, they have licensee files of Nebraska architects. So you might look in your state and see if there is something similar. Usually architects need a license to be an architect. So you would want to look for that paperwork. And then once you know the name of an architect, because you found it in the newspaper, that will help you look up more information about them in files such as this, or this site down here, which is wonderful, the American Institute of Architects. There's a lot of great information there. You can look up your architect by name. It covers the whole country. And there's some really great information there because they upload the paperwork there. I asked about an architect who wasn't already in there. I contacted them and they scanned what there was and uploaded it. So if you don't see, I mean, usually they would have at least the name of the person because they list all the members, previous and current. But if there's papers that you don't see there, you can contact them and ask them about it. And if you have an ancestor who is an architect, that is going to be pure gold. You're going to find a lot of really good stuff. The State Historical Preservation Office here has files on architects and a few blueprints, and it's possible that the one in Nevada has the same. I did not investigate that thoroughly. And by the way, blueprints are so hard to find. That's one of the things people ask for a lot, and it is super difficult to find the plans for an individual house if your house was not anything famous. So our next subject here is maps, which are your best friend, as well as newspapers. And one of the best is the fire insurance maps. If you've never used them, do go to the Library of Congress and look. First of all, they have a really good description of what the fire insurance maps are, what they were created for, all the different features that they offer. And they have digitized basically all of their earlier ones, and we'll probably do, and they're continuing to digitize more. So you'd probably be able to find them for your state and cities. So fire insurance maps, if you've never used them, they were maps that were created so that insurance companies could assess the risk of fire damage so that they would know what to charge their clients. Obviously, if a business is in a wooden building next to a steam laundry and with no fire hydrants anywhere in the area, your insurance rates are going to be higher than if it's a brick building standing out in the middle of a field with nothing around it, or else right next to the fire department. So these things made these maps very helpful for insurance purposes, but they're also wonderful for our purposes because they are so detailed. You can see on this one, they were in color. They would update them every so often by reassessing everything. If something had changed, they would cut out these little pieces of paper and paste them over the old stuff to update them rather than do a whole new map. But it shows the addresses, it shows what they were made of. Each color means something. There's a lot of little symbols that you can't see very well here that mean something. So it would tell you what the building was made out of, how many floors, whether it had steam heating, all sorts of things that you could find out from this. So these are very cool. They will tell you a lot about, and it shows you the footprint of your house. It shows the shape of the house and a lot more information. So some libraries have databases that cover these. And by the way, they're called Sanborn. I mean, not all fire insurance maps are Sanborn maps, technically. Sanborn was the first company that created these. There have been other companies over time that also create fire insurance maps, but they're always called Sanborns. So this is from our FEMO database, which is one that we have here. It covers Nebraska and Iowa. It's kind of an expensive database. That's why we only have it for 2 states. And it is very cool. And then a lot of libraries also have this one, Digital Sanborn Maps, 1867 to 1970 by ProQuest. It's also, it also shows it's not in color because they did it from microfilm. So their key to explain what all the symbols are and everything is a little bit different because they couldn't use color to describe things. But it's also a wonderful thing to have. And a lot of larger libraries have this database. So you might want to check around and see if any library that you have a card for has this. The Mid-Continent Public Library in Independence, Missouri has this database, for example. Let's see. Oh, and before we move on, I want to mention that if you just Google digitized Sanborn maps, you're going to get a lot of individual projects, like the University of Pennsylvania has digitized a bunch of Pennsylvania maps, and the Library of Congress, as I mentioned, has done maps from all over the country. And then, you know, whatever, I believe in Cleveland, they've either the public library or some other institution there has digitized the Cleveland plat map, the Cleveland Sanborn map. So you want to use Google, which is your best friend. So the next thing we want to look at is plat maps. Plat maps, I'm sure you've come across these in doing your genealogy. A plat map will show the parameters of the individual lots or blocks that make up a subdivision, for example. In most cases, the subdivision will have a name. It's going to be names like the such and such edition, the such and such, the Tegemeyer replat, those kinds of things. And then each subdivision is divided into lots. We're talking about city here. And then the lots have their own numbers. So, and these plat maps will usually show you the owner's name. You can, I don't know how well you can see this because it's kind of small and blurry, but it tells you how many acres it is and the name of the owner, and it also shows railroads and things like that. So plat maps can be very helpful, and especially for rural properties. You're much more likely to get benefit out of these because this type, when it's in a city, it's not going to show the owners generally, although it may show owners of large swaths of land. I have this here because the Nebraska State Historical Society has a pretty cool index to its collection. They've got over 500 county atlases or plat books, and they have created a database where you can look up a surname and it will tell you what maps, what plat maps that surname appears in, and then you can go look it up. It actually references the microfilm that those plat books are on, and we have that microfilm, but most of those atlases, since they're pretty old, you can often find them on Internet Archive or other digitized book sites. And then the other way to find plat maps is just Google them, because a lot of libraries and other institutions have digitized them. We have a really nice map collection in our digital collections, which I can't remember if I put that on your handout, but if not, I can show you at the end. Now, old photos of your house. This is the thing people ask for probably as often as blueprints, maybe even more. And it's actually one of the hardest things to find unless of course your house is on the historical register and it's one of those famous houses that appears on postcards and so on. Usually this house, you can guess, is not on the historical register, but it's from a photo collection that we have here, a guy who just went around taking pictures of things in Omaha way back. So my advice for finding those, you may never find one, but I would start by trying to locate previous owners and neighbors. Often they will have pictures that they took, especially of events, outside events, birthday parties, block parties, those kinds of things, and your house may appear in one of those pictures. Newspapers, again, as we saw, there was a picture of a house after it had recently been built. And don't forget articles and ads. Sometimes they'll have openings of houses or neighborhoods, and they'll have a picture to publicize it. Building prospectuses like this. This is one that we have, and even though the houses are sort of generic, this is the type of house that's in that development. So this would tell you what the house looked like when it was built. Because by now, if you're living in it 60 years later, it may have undergone all kinds of changes. And then historic postcards and photos. Many, many libraries have some kind of digital archive of postcards and photos, even fairly small libraries. And you also want to look at statewide collections. So this is our collection, digital.omahalibrary.org. We have maps there, we have postcards, we have photos like the one we just saw. And then there's a statewide platform, nebraskamemories.org, that has postcards, pictures, all kinds of cool stuff from all around the state. And you will find that a lot of states have something like that. In fact, I put on your handout, I believe, or did I put it here? Here. Western Nevada Historic Photo Collection, which is not a state-run thing, but it's somebody's running it, and it's very cool. They have a lot of really nice photographs and things on it. For Omaha, the Durham Museum Photo Archive is phenomenal. They have over 1 million images, I think, and they still have a way to go to get all of them online, but they certainly do have a lot online. And then the Douglas County Historical Society and the State Historical Society also are making efforts in that direction. So you always want to check your local historical societies, and also colleges and universities are a good place. You want to, almost all of them have some kind of digital archive. You really want to go and see what they have. Okay, so I know it seems obvious, but it's the easy thing to forget. Actually look at your house, because there may be a lot of things that your house can tell you just by the way it looks. First of all, it may be very obvious that something was added on because it doesn't really match the rest of the house in some way, either in materials or style. You might find something like a toilet tank might have a date on it. Some bricks might have a manufacturer's imprint, or found this, the house that's got the date of it's like stuck here on the side of the porch. If a brick has a manufacturer's imprint, you can go look and see when that manufacturer was in business, because that will also help you date the house and also the materials that it was constructed with. The type of nails used changed over time. All kinds of stuff changed over time. You might be able to see remnants of old paint jobs. My house has some really wild bits of paint that show through sort of where the top coat is cracked now. And I would love to see what it looked like when it was new. A thing I learned recently, drywall, which is used everywhere now. It was only invented in 1916, and it was not popular at first. It was considered cheap and shoddy. So if your old house was built in like 1890 but has drywall in it, then you know that that was a later addition. Similarly, if it was all plaster, which is what they used to use, plaster was sort of more work intensive. You had to do a coat, let it dry, do another coat, let it dry. If it's all plaster, then it's probably older than, because once drywall caught on, that's what people use because it's easier and cheaper. And then you'd also want to look at your house compared with the neighbors. Does it look different? Is it the same style, same type, or totally different? Because maybe the neighborhood dates back to 1900, but your house was built in 1950. Then we get to the part that's the most fun for genealogists, and is really where we actually start, many of us, if that is our focus. which is why I said you should know what your focus is going to be on this. What's the thing that's most important to you? So, but you're always going to want to know who lived there. And who lived there is not necessarily the same as who owned the building. So I know we just did all this property research to see who owned it, you know, chain of title and all that. But you might be interested in a house that your ancestor only lived in because they rented it. They never owned it, but it's still going to be important because they lived there. So here, one of our best resources is city directories, and I will try to restrain myself, but I've done a whole presentation on this, and it is it's just a fun topic. The city directories are pretty easy to find for most cities. Ancestry, Library Edition, and Ancestry.com have good city directory collections. For Omaha, it goes up to 1959. And I think my heritage also has a pretty good city directory. I believe that Suzanne just mentioned that they've upgraded it even. So they also have a very good city directory collection. And then lots of universities and libraries and other institutions often have digital collections of city directories. And then your local library probably has, or they might anyway, have just a collection of the physical directories for their city. And we have that here at Omaha Public Library. We've got all the city directories that were ever printed beginning in 1866 and up to now. Those are extremely useful, and they get a lot of use. It's probably the resource that people use most often here. Why are they so great? They list all adult residents alphabetically, so you can look them up by name, with their addresses and occupations, at least back in the day, and including adult employed children. It's a good way to find the first appearance of an address. So especially if there's a reverse lookup, we'll talk about that in a minute, but you can look to see when that address first appeared in a city directory, and that gives you kind of a starting date for your house's timeline. This information is going to help you look for other information. Keep in mind the names of streets often changed. We have a wonderful book here at the library, could be interlibrary loaned if you're doing Omaha research, called Streets of Omaha, where the author went through and documented the name of every street, what name changes it went through and when, and which way it runs. So that book gets a lot of use too. I don't know if any other city has ever done a book like that, but it's really great. House numbers might change as well because additional houses are built on a block, or the street address changes if the front door on a corner house, if the front door moves from one side to the other. There's all kinds of ways that the address might change. Look, when you start using these directories, make sure you understand what all the abbreviations mean. If you go to, like, this B means boards, RMS means rooms, this means bartender, that means widow of Peter, which would be great genealogical information. So the abbreviations are usually in the beginning of the book. So always, even if you think you know what most of them mean, it's never a bad idea to go double check. Those things changed a bit. City directories are also nice because you can also get a lot of information about the neighborhood. These are usually on the first pages, and people tend to skip them, but don't skip them because there's a ton of useful stuff. There's information about the churches. This will help you sort of figure out the layout of your neighborhood. You can look and see what church the people in your house might have gone to. You notice this high school, the schools here are listing all the teachers and also all the janitors. So you're going to get a lot of interesting genealogical information here too. And it also will tell you things like the ward boundaries, social organizations, and so on. They also list like post offices, postal carriers, the location of fire alarm boxes, which the Sanborn people would be happy to know about and actually put on their maps. They do put those on their maps. Often you'll find a whole history of the area. Here we've got this is from the Omaha City Directory in 1893. It describes all the different libraries and what they had, how many volumes they had. I mean, this is not actually that pertinent to our topic, but but I think it's just great. I like to know this stuff. They erected a fine fireproof public library building, which we are no longer in. And then here also you'll often find a map of the city or the downtown or some part of the city, and those maps are really pretty good. This one is for Madison, Wisconsin. The best thing is if they've got a reverse directory, because this is a wonderful way to plot out your neighborhood. So the Omaha directories, a reverse directory means you can look it up by the address rather than the person, which means you don't have to know who lived in it, which is ideal for our purposes. So for example, you're looking up, if you want to know who lived at 1480 Evans Street, you would go to Evans and then you just look for the right number, and then it tells you who it was, and then you can look up this person in the front of the book where everybody is listed by their name, and you can find out more information about him, his occupation probably, and basically his occupation. And I don't know, sometimes, depending what year it is, you'll find different information. So Omaha has reverse directories for all the years except before 1887 and between 1892 and 1911. If you are able to access city directories digitally, there too you can search on an address without knowing the person. And that's helpful too. But what I really like about these is you can see all the neighbors right off. You know, so you know that Joseph Pick lived next door or else across the street, depending how they were going, to R.E. Marble. And you'd also be able to see down here, you see, oh, well, J.R. Leader was right by St. Paul's Evangelical Lutheran School. And when you're doing genealogy or house history, that's really going to be useful information, because you'll know probably a lot of people in the neighborhood were using that church. The University of Nevada, for example, has digitized city directories for Reno and Sparks from 1900 to 1939. As I said, Ancestry has a good collection, so does MyHeritage, and also check out Internet Archive. They have digitized some city directories, and if you look at Haughty Trust, that's another good source to find things like that. Another thing that you might overlook when you're using these directories is the advertisements. Sometimes those will even give you a picture, like here, Omaha Abandoned Storage. It shows us a picture of the building, and those pictures are usually accurate. I mean, they are a picture of that building, not a generic building. And I presume this is a picture of their cart. And then the advertisements, the banners and the sides will also often have some useful information if you're researching a commercial building. Okay, we've done all of that, and then you've figured out who lives in your house. So then it's straight genealogy. You're going to want to find out more about them. And I know you all know about the census, so you're going to look at the census to get more information about those people every 10 years. Now we can look in the 1950 census. The Nebraska had a few state censuses. Probably none of us are going to be tracing our houses back to 1857, but you might be tracing your family back that far. So, and Nevada has an 1875 state census, so you might have a look at that if you're, as I said, that's kind of far back to be figuring out a house, and I don't think it had much information about that, but at least you would know who lived in that area. And then there's plenty more good genealogy stuff. As we know, here at the main library, we've got a cool obituary card index that you could just look up the person, and we've glued the obituary right there. And I think you'll find that other libraries often, obituary indexes are one of the most common projects that they do. So you might find something like that either in print or online. You'll want to look for estate records, inventories. We mentioned probate is a good way to see if property is passing from person to person that way. And in those estate files, you will often find receipts and debts and things that might also relate to the house. For example, money is owed to somebody who put on a new roof or who added a garage or something else. So probate records can be a very rich source of house information. Vital records, we're just going to tell you more about the person who lived there. And then newspapers, of course, I always come back to newspapers. Here at the main library, we also have marriage records for most of the eastern Nebraska counties, and for Douglas County, which is where we are, we have them all from 1857 to 2005. And then don't get so focused on the individual that you forget to look at the big picture. Were they part of a pattern, these people who lived in your house? Was your house part of a pattern? Did they belong to a particular ethnic group? What was the architectural fashion of your house? What was the style? Did it accord with what was the trend at the time? What sort of local business resources are there? Have you looked in the architectural trade catalogs, which are a great place to see the types of fixtures and building materials and furniture even that would be typical of the house that you are researching? You'll want to look at, we have something called reconnaissance surveys here, which sort of look at the whole, they do a survey of the whole neighborhood and talk about the history and the architecture and so on. And there might be something like that for the area that you are researching. But there's always going to be local histories and ethnic studies. If, say, you're researching an Italian neighborhood, you would want to look into the broader picture of what brought Italians to this city and that part of town. And this is all stuff that you should also be doing just in your general genealogy research, because this is how you really shape the story of your family as well as your house. And don't forget, there's always places you can go for help. I've listed a few of the websites that we have here, and the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office has a lot of good resources. And I find quite a lot of stuff just by Googling researching your house history. You will find quite a few how-tos, and there's also a lot of good webinars on this. Try research your house history and add the word webinar to get probably a better webinar than what I'm doing. But there's a lot of help out there, so don't forget to look for it. And then are, of course, a ton of printed resources. I mentioned the Streets of Omaha just because I love it. It's probably not going to be useful to you unless you're researching in Omaha, but it's the sort of thing that I wish everybody would write. And then this book here is actually available online. So if you are doing, it's online at the landmark cityofomaha.org website, as well as some other things. So if you are doing research here in Omaha, there's some good resources. And then there are a ton of books about house history, architectural history. A Field Guide to American Houses is one of the Bibles in this area. It's a great book, but there's other books like it as well, and you can probably find this one at your library. And then the Nebraska State Historical Society has a nice PDF version of researching your Nebraska property, and a lot of the principles there are really applicable to wherever you're researching, just like a lot of the things I mentioned here. Everything here is all stuff that potentially can be found in this similar types of offices and resources in other places. So you just need to be aware that you are looking for that type of thing, and then it's not that difficult to actually find it. Yeah, so if you start at Omaha Public Library, which is omahalibrary.org, and then the resource center here, which is where we are. Some of our resources there are free for anybody. They're just links really for convenience. But Catholic Voice, for example, that is the local Catholic paper, and actually it covers all of northeastern Nebraska. So if you have interest there, that's a great resource. It's the newspaper. Family Search, obviously you all know. The fire insurance maps, you do need a library card. And another good one is Omaha Area Obits. That is also a free index. It's just linked here for convenience, but it's basically maintained by the Greater Omaha Genealogical Society. So that's also great if you have local people. And then what I want to show you is if you go to the Explore and go to Historical Images and Documents, we've got a lot of good digital collections here. We've got Douglas County Death Register indexes. We've got some very early death registers on microfilm, and a volunteer has indexed them. So we have volumes 1 and 2 up. I'm going to be putting volume 4 up soon. And almost all the information in the register appears there. So this is great for genealogists. As you can see, you can just search for the person. And then the other thing that's very useful if you're researching properties is the maps and atlases. We've got a lot of maps, and I have still more to upload, but all of these are free to use. And as I mentioned, a lot of libraries and archives have similar collections. Maps are one of the most popular items to digitize because they're so useful. And that's basically what I wanted to show you from. We've also got a pretty good selection of photos. That photographer I mentioned who walked around Omaha taking pictures is this collection, and that's him. He didn't only walk, he also rode his bike. And he died in the early 1900s. So his photos are really invaluable because they show Omaha in pretty early days, and he also took pictures of things that postcards didn't take pictures of and people didn't necessarily take pictures of. So I just encourage you all to look in your own local library and archive and see what valuable collections they might have put online. That's really all I have to say. So if you have any questions, let me just stop sharing again. Hang on. If you have any questions, I would be delighted to hear them.
Martha, would you like to turn on your camera?
Yes, I will. I didn't ever
Perfect.
turn it off for some reason, but
Okay, now there is one question I see here in the chat box. Let's see here. Bill would like to know what information, if any, might your library have for Council Bluffs, Iowa, which is right across the river?
we do have a fair amount of, we have a collection called Nebraska Reference. It's closed stacks, but it's all in our catalog online. And so even though it's Nebraska Reference, we do have a lot of things from Council Bluffs since we're basically the same large metropolitan area. So we have quite a lot. The Council Bluffs Public Library has some amazing collections, and they also have a really nice digital collection that's online through their library. You just go to the website. They also have access to the Council Bluffs non-Perel newspaper. Genealogy Bank, if you have a subscription to that, also includes the Council Bluffs non-Perel. And then in our genealogy department, we have a lot of Iowa resources, county histories. We have city directories for Council Bluffs in paper from, let's see, not quite as long a range as we have for Omaha, but a pretty good range. And county histories, we also have a lot of sort of extracts, vital records, that kind of thing for different counties of Iowa, and a lot for Potawatomi County, which is where Council Bluffs is. And then we've got some cemetery books and that sort of thing for Council Bluffs and other cities in Iowa.
Wonderful. Now, on your one slide that you had, I think it was titled Property Records. What is the to and from dates on the property records that you were referring to?
Which property records?
I think the slide was just called Property Records. It was towards the beginning of your presentation. I was just wondering, you know, you don't have to go back to it if you don't want to, but I was just wondering if offhand you knew the from and to dates. You know, what was the earliest date? What was the latest date?
Oh, I think that was just property records in general as a topic. Yeah, as a topic. But as far as Douglas County, those records go back to the 1860s. In fact, probably the earliest is the 1850s. And they've got them all from the beginning at the deeds office. And the ones that they have online are also, you can see back to, I think 1857 is their starting date.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yes.
Class, if you'd like to unmute your microphone, please leave your camera off since we're recording. But if you'd like to unmute your microphone and ask her a question directly, please do.
Hi, this is Wendy. And my, you were talking about Omaha, and my grandparents went to school in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I was poking around because my grandma always said that she lived with her auntie in Lincoln. And I found the place and I've had a little bit more information by kind of looking a little deeper at the directory. So thank you for sharing today. So
oh, you're welcome.
Something fun to add. It looks like the house is still there, and you know, you always think your grandparents grew up on a farm and that things were
yeah.
the house they lived in was pretty nice, I'm assuming, for back then.
Yeah. Oh, and something also to do. I mean, now we have street, you know, Google Street View. Do go and see if your house is still there. You can usually tell if it's unlikely to be the original house, if it looks too modern for, you know, the time period you're looking for. But that's also a pretty fun thing to do, to see what the house looks like today, especially if it's a place you can't get to physically.
Yeah, and when I was looking at it, I was going back to the census and seeing their addresses, and I even found out the two aunties were living in an apartment, and they both give different places where their parents were born, which I chuckle at. But then after 1910, then they moved into their homes. So in the 20s is when my grandparents would have been living with them. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah, that's really interesting. It's always fun to discover these things that you thought you knew something and you find you didn't.
Yeah, exactly. And especially because I have in my collection from my grandpa, I have love letters. Well, they aren't really love letters. They're where he's trying to court her, and he's going to school at Lincoln, and my grandma's living in Phillipsburg, Kansas, and they're talking about a house that they're going to buy and how much they're going to pay and the floor plans of the house.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
so it talks about the addresses that he's looked at this house address and this house address. And so their 100th anniversary for their wedding is coming up. So I'm trying to get up the gumption to write a book. Sue keeps pushing me. So
Yes,
we'll get
you
there.
should. Wow, that would be amazing. That most house historians don't get that kind of thing of the potential floor plans and so on.
Yeah, I think they've all been demolished now, though. I think it's close to the university and
Yes,
but
yes, the
but
university
still
expanded.
yeah.
Oh, and don't forget yearbooks. I mean, those are readily available. We've got the Lincoln yearbooks, University of Lincoln and University of Omaha, as well as a lot of other fairly local high school and college yearbooks.
Yes, thank you. I have the 1925 ones. They're pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they've got theirs online too. They've digitized them. Both UNL has a huge digitizing program, so they've got a wonderful site.
So might be something for me to add it to their collection when I get the book written. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, and we're always happy to take donations of things people have written, and we do add them to our collection.
Okay. All right. That might be another one.
Yeah, when it's of local interest. Both we have a big family genealogy section, and then we also have a lot of sort of community stories.
And link it, and you would
local.
take stuff for
Oh
Lincoln?
yeah. The family genealogies we take for the whole country, and then because we also let them go out on interlibrary loan for in-person use, for in-library use only, and then we also, I mean, our standard for things of local interest is lower in terms of presentation and everything. I mean, it doesn't have to be like published by Penguin Books or something to pass muster. We don't mind sort of homemade books if the topic is important.
That's good to know. Very, very good to know, Martha. How about anybody else? Wendy, that was a great question. Anybody else? Well, while I'm waiting for other people, I had a few comments I wanted to go. I had never thought until I saw your presentation today about researching a property record by its legal description in newspapers. I mean, that had just never occurred to me. So I learned something really valuable today. Now, you mentioned that you can locate, there was one slide here. I think I wrote down the note. Let's see here. You'd mentioned tracing people who did not necessarily own. I would assume that was what you were referring to, the directories. Right. Yes. So you'll find people in the directory. They don't necessarily own the houses. Now, in later directories, those are kind of nice, like in the last 15, 20 years anyway. They added symbols to say whether the person listed was the homeowner and how many years, and also how many years they had, whoever it was resident in that house. So that gives you even more information. The earlier directories don't tell you whether the person is the owner or just renting, but a lot of them were just renting, and you would be able to sort of explore that more by checking the census sometimes to see, do they own any real property, or other you'd look for deeds and things. So looking at the front of the directory for the legend, for the abbreviations, would be very, very important. Yes, it's always good, because also the what sorts of information the directory gave, it did change over the years. So the directory today gives a bunch of information that early directories don't, but on the other hand, it doesn't have a lot of information that they used to put, things like who the spouse was. They never put that anymore. But that used to be very common in the earlier directories. Who was the spouse, where they worked. That's less common now. Another thing that I had never thought about that before that you brought up in today's presentation, about how looking for articles about neighbors to see if maybe the property that you're actually researching might be in a picture of a neighbor's property. I mean, what an amazing bit of sleuthing.
Yes, yes. Well, and especially you want to talk to, if you move into a place, you want to find out who the oldest residents are and talk to them before they die. Talk to them about, neighborhood history, who used to live here. And often they'll know some good information, and they might know who has a picture if they don't themselves of
Very
something
good.
that
I
happened.
have an aunt that lived in Glendale. She died several years back. And her grandson inherited the house. And I went there one day unannounced, because I didn't know the grandson. And I went unannounced and I just knocked on the door and he wasn't home. However, there was an older woman living right across the street from them. And I kind of was just loitering around on the off chance that they might come home while I was still there. And I ended up talking to this older woman who lived across the street, and she knew my aunt.
Oh,
So
that's
yeah, so
great.
she
Yeah.
actually shared some stories with me about my aunt, which I just thought was, worth the trip in and of itself. So that's
Oh,
very
yes.
good advice. Look for the oldest people in the neighborhood.
Oh, yes. And one other thing that I think I forgot to mention, but sometimes you can find photos of streets or say a parade or something, and the building you're looking for might be in the background. So for example, when I go to the Durham Photo Archive, which I mentioned, which was on one of the slides, people will be looking for a picture of their house. I'm never going to look for the address of the house because that's not going to come up, but I might look for, if it's on Farnham Street, I might look for Farnham Street and see all the pictures that come up with that, because possibly there were a lot of parades and events on Farnham Street. I might see that building in the background.
Oh, very good point.
Or you can put in an intersection, say, Farnham and 16th or something.
Now, we were talking about plat mats and fire maps earlier. I just wanted to let everyone know, if they are researching local here in Nevada, UNR has a tremendous amount of archives. I posted that in the chat box here to let everyone know. I posted a link that talked about those plat maps that are at UNR. And also, I wanted to say something also that I had already realized, and I've kind of already been doing this for several years. You mentioned the value of postcards for the local area. I have a lot of ancestors that came from Woodbury County, Iowa. Right after the Civil War, they relocated from New York to Iowa. And I have been buying, late 1800s, early 1900 postcards from Woodbury County, Iowa for quite a while now, because I am planning on eventually publishing a book on that side of my ancestors. And I kind of wanted to get the idea of, like, I may never find a picture of their house per se, but I could certainly find the post office, on a postcard, or the courthouse on a postcard,
Right.
Or the school, the high school on a postcard, which I know that they utilized during their lifetime. But yes, I couldn't agree with you more. And I wanted to stress that to everybody in the class. Buy those postcards for your local area. And I'll tell you, the one thing I've noticed about postcards, and I've been doing this for several years now, is the prices are really going up on these old postcards.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I used to pay like, $2 and $3 a postcard. Now they're like $7, $10, $15, $20 a postcard.
Yes. Yeah. Look for sales. Once you get on their mailing list, they'll keep sending you information. Oh, half off today. Yeah. And the thing about, first of all, a lot of institutions have digitized collections of postcards. We have a lot of ours are on Nebraska Memories, that site I mentioned, and we have even more that I still need to put up on our site. But if they're from before 1926, they're usually they're going to be out of copyright, and you can use those digitized images to illustrate your own family histories, which I'm sure you're all writing. Here's the post office in my ancestor's town or whatever. Here is the street that they probably walked down to get to the church, which is in this postcard. So that can be a good source of illustrations for works that you're doing.
I just recently interlibrary loaned a book. I think it was called The Post Offices of Iowa.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it was a really great book. I mean, like probably I would be the only person in the world that really found it fascinating, but I read the whole thing cover to cover because, I had such family history in Iowa.
Oh, yeah.
So it really is interesting to read about the history of post offices and where your ancestors were. So let's see here. I'm looking through. Oh, and I wanted to thank you also for tailoring the presentation so much to Washoe today. I really appreciate that as well. That was very thoughtful.
It was kind of a speed lookup job.
Well,
I feel like there's probably a lot more resources there than I am aware of. So if I got anything wrong, just take it with a grain of salt.
No, we really appreciate that extra time you put in to help us. So, okay, I'll give the class one more chance to unmute your microphone and ask her a question directly.
Somebody's raised their hand. I don't know if they did that on purpose.
Let's see here.
Schultz.
Yes.
That's Catherine. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is about the postcards. I was born in a tiny Mississippi Delta town, and right by the railroad tracks, there was a line of buildings where my grandfather's law office was. And on eBay, I found I think it was a 1912, which was before he had the office there, but the building was still there, was already there. And so I thought, oh, I'll get this postcard. It's from somebody in Australia who was trying to charge $112 for that postcard.
Oh my goodness.
And it's such a tiny town, and I may be the only person in the universe who's interested in it. But
yes.
I can't pay $112.
I would Google and see if somebody has a digital image of it elsewhere, because
I was hoping
postcard collections are so common.
The Mississippi Department of Archives and History has a lot of them, and I've gotten like the church they went to and the post office and the depot and things like that. But that one is only, as far as I've been able to find, is the guy in Australia where he got it, I don't know.
Yeah, that is odd.
Catherine, I bought a school yearbook from the little town in North Dakota where my mom's family was from, and it had some of my mom's cousins, her first cousins, in the yearbook. So I bought it, and I thought it was way overpriced. I think I paid $70 for it. And when I got it, I emailed the lady back and who sold it to me on eBay. And I said, where in the world did you find this? She goes, well, I live in Spain, but I was in the U.S. visiting, just doing vacationing. And I went into an old shop, like an old used shop. And she goes, I found it. And she goes, I took it back with me to Spain and put it on eBay.
Oh,
well, maybe the Australian guy did that too.
Probably. Or maybe somebody sent him the postcard.
Well, great.
I doubt if anybody in Shelby, Mississippi knew anybody in Australia.
Well, Martha, this has been wonderful. I'll give the class just one more opportunity to ask questions.
I don't have a question, but I will put in chat. I heard a speaker talk about postcards, the Kurt Teich. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Teich. There's a postcard collection.
Uh-huh.
And I'll put the link in there. And then you can, I found some for Memphis because I'm from that area too, Catherine. So maybe you'll get lucky with that collection.
Yes, it's a wonderful collection.
Say the name of that again. I couldn't hear what you said.
It's called the Kurt Teich, Teich, postcard collection. It's at the Newberry Library.
Oh, Newberry. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
And you're from, I live right outside Memphis now.
Oh, I was born and raised in West Memphis.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, Martha, this has been wonderful. And before I say goodbye to you, I just want to remind the class that we have another hour or so left of class, and we'd love for you all to stay if you'd like to. If you'd prefer to leave at this point, all you have to do to leave today's session is click on that red end button. And with that, Martha, once again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for allowing us to record as well. We really appreciate that. And I'll be back in touch with you as a follow-up here very shortly. And with that, I'll just ask everyone to go ahead and click on that red button. If you're going to stay, please just unmute your microphone and your camera, and we'll get started with the second half of class, and I will stop the recording right now.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Martha.
Good luck with all your research, and I will leave now.
Thank you so much,
Have a good rest of your class. Bye.
Bye-bye.